guys, Christian from Chef's Films back here again today with another budget tips and techniques video covering recording video, or in other words, everything to take care of before hitting that record button. Now anyways, before we get into that, be sure to check out all of our links down in the description to our Twitter, our Facebook, and our very own website with all of our blog posts, short films, everything all right there for you. While you're at it, hit that subscribe and bell notification so you can stay updated on all of our future uploads like this, as well as our product reviews and our short films. Now let's go ahead and get right into the video. Okay, so part number one of this video is going to be batteries. This is probably the biggest thing you need to worry about before pressing the record button, because if you don't have charged batteries, well, pressing the record button really won't do much of anything. So always before a shoot, I usually do it at least a day in advance. I just set up a battery charging station with all of my batteries, all of my chargers, and I just go set them all up there, set timers to check them periodically, make sure that everything gets charged and ready to go for the next day. So I've got a spot for my C100 charger, I've got a spot for my T5i charger, I've got a spot for you name it. All of my chargers, my drone, my Ronin M, I make sure all of my batteries, even if I don't think I'm going to be using that device the next day, I make sure all of them are charged and ready to go. And also make sure that you put the batteries away properly. Do not leave them in a device, because that will just suck power out constantly even if the device is not turned on. And granted, while the battery is just sitting there, it will still lose power, but much more gradually than if it is plugged into a device. And also make sure to actually pack the batteries before the shoot, because we've all had that happen. We get to location and we forgot the batteries. And also, if you're going somewhere, if you know you've got electricity or you think that you might, I would recommend bringing chargers with you just in case, because you never know how quickly one of those batteries is actually going to die on you. Technology can sometimes be unreliable, and you never know what's going to happen. So I'd recommend just keeping the chargers on you just in case, maybe even having a separate dedicated bag just to carrying chargers and cables. And when you're on set, make sure that you actually put the batteries into the device before pressing record. Trust me, I've done this. I get there, have everything all set up, go to turn on the camera, and what's not there? The one thing that gives it power. Another important tip, SD cards. They are a huge part of filmmaking. It's as essential as batteries. If you don't have any place to store the footage, you can't really record it. So make sure you're carrying SD cards with you, whether it be having at least two, so you have one and a backup to get you through a day is fine, and then just doing a dump at the end of the day. Make sure you're backing up those videos and cleaning them off again, having them ready for the next day, that's fine. Myself personally, I have an SD carrier case, nice hard one that's waterproof, that I carry with me. Got spare SDs in there. I've got SD cards. I've got two for my audio recorder, 2 or 4, I can't remember. I believe I have 4 for my C100. I have 2 for my T5i, and I've got a couple extra micro SDs for my Zoom H1. I make sure that I've got plenty of SD cards, so that if I run out of space on one and for some reason I'm having issues formatting it, or I need to back up the footage for that still and I can't format it, I'll just throw in the next card and I'll make sure that I have spares enough to get me through a day. I carry as many 64 gigabytes as I can. I've got a couple of 32s for the audio because that doesn't take up nearly as much space. So just kind of keep that in mind. Make sure you've got SD cards on you, you've got spare ones, you've got plenty of storage to get you through the day. Always make sure that before you go on shoot, you're checking your SD cards to see how much space they have and which ones are actually available to shoot with. There's nothing more frustrating than getting everything set up like on a gimbal or a Steadicam or something, realizing the SD card you have in the camera is full and you gotta go swap out to a backup. Nothing more frustrating than that. Well, I suppose there's a lot more frustrating, but I mean that's really frustrating still. And also, if your camera, much like mine, has 2 different SD card slots and you have the option for relay or backup recording, make sure you change the settings to your need. For me, like what I'm doing right now, this is a bulk recording session I'm doing this video in, so I would prefer to use the relay so that I can just keep on going. I don't have to worry about running out of space. I've got plenty of storage. As soon as one card fills up, it'll go right to the next one. But if I'm doing a short film or I'm doing something where I can only get footage that one time and it's really important footage, I'm going to throw on the backup footage so I make sure I have 2 copies of the video and I have less chance of corrupted footage. The next step is gear. Always make sure you've got the gear you need for a shoot. For me, once again, this is all planning in advance before the shoot, knowing what gear you need, writing it down on a list, making sure that you've got all of the gear in the bag checking off everything as you go until you've got that whole list all accounted for. Double check through it, double check to make sure everything is there. Trust me, getting on set and having forgotten that one thing is ridiculous. It hurts. Especially if it's something super essential. The last thing you want is to forget the one camera you need for a specific day. Trust me, no, it's not fun. So always double check, even account for the minor things, because you never know what specific tool you're gonna need that you're not gonna have. So always double check, and if you can, pack more than you think you need. Part 4, white balance. This is once you're actually on set, camera's on, you're just about ready to go. But now you gotta start getting into the little details. So you gotta set your white balance. Now a lot of people tend to carry a palette on them, some sort of way to identify the colors, make sure that everything is looking good and has the proper color that it should. I just have a little white poster board that I carry with me that I have tape at the edges. You can use black tape and stuff like that so you can get all your different scales on there if you want. Make your own little palette card for cheap. I just carry the white around, so as long as my white's balanced, I can theoretically, do the rest in post. I don't recommend doing it that way. Go the film right way, shoot everything, or shoot as much as you can into the camera, and do as little as you can in post. But when you're kind of running gun like me, and you're just kind of by yourself, you don't really have a crew, sometimes you just got to go with those little alternatives and make those few shortcuts. As much as it sucks, and we really hate to do it, we can't have hands for everything. So once again, just make sure that you're adjusting the white balance in your camera. If you really don't know how to do that, or you don't know anything about white balance, I'll probably be covering a different video on that. But for the time being, at least use auto white balance so your camera can get it as close as it can on its own, and at least save you somewhat of a headache. And when you get time, research how to do white balance, because it's an important thing to learn. Just doing auto white balance all the time is going to make your images look, trust me, you want to learn it. Also, when setting your white balance, take your lighting into consideration. Sometimes you might have a mix like I do right now. I've got an orange light over here, and I've got a white key light. So I've got kind of a color balance there that I've got to work with. I've adjusted my white balance accordingly to set it roughly where I need it to be, and then I can fix the little details later in post and just kind of touch it up a little bit. Alrighty, part 5, exposure. This is a huge thing. Underexposed and overexposed images in independent amateur short films are, oh boy, do they hurt sometimes to look at. Like, even in my films, there are several cases of under and overexposed images that you can look at. Tons of examples, because at the time, I didn't know exposure that well. All I knew is I had this little dot moving on my exposure line. Now I've gotten to start using waveforms and stuff. Like right now on my camera, I've got my waveform going so I can see where I'm under and overexposed. I've got a little scale going there. But just knowing your exposure, knowing how to use your lights, available lighting, and I apologize for the noise. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. This building isn't just for me, so I'm really sorry about that, guys. I'm doing what I can. I'm trying to kind of be a little bit louder. But with exposure, just be aware of your lighting. Use available lighting. Bring lights with you. Know what you have. Try to do everything outside of camera first before moving into camera, because then you'll have a lot more room to work with. Once you get into camera, there's 3 different exposure settings you can adjust. Starting off, you can adjust ISO, that is your camera's sensitivity to light. So the higher the number, the more sensitive your camera is to light. It digitally increases the sensitivity. So increasing that number, really you're going to start introducing some digital noise into the shot, which does not look very professional. In fact, it looks very amateur and very just like obviously fake, and takes out the whole immersion of film and video. So try to keep that number as low as you can, and the way you can compensate for that when you keep that number low is to open up your aperture, which is your f-stop. The lower number you have on your f-stop, the wider open your aperture is and the more light you're going to be allowing in. Keep in mind though that your aperture also affects your field of focus. The more open you have your aperture, the narrower that focus field is, and the more you close it down, the wider it gets. So when you have it wide open, you can get really nice blurred background effects and really nice depth through that. But if you prefer to have just everything in focus, you can close down that f-stop, go up to like higher number, like in f8. That would be a good place. You'd get a lot in focus there. But at the same time, you're also going to be letting in that much less light. Each f-stop cuts the light in half. So if you start off at 1.8 and you go up to 2, that is going to cut the amount of light going into your camera in half. and it goes that way for each step. The numbers are kind of weird. It goes F1, F1.4, F2, F2.8, F4, so on and so forth. Basically, you just need to memorize F1 and F1.4, and then you just double those alternatively. And that's how you can memorize your f-stops. And like I said, every time you go up a stop, you're cutting the light in half. Also in exposure, you have to worry about shutter speed. Shutter speed is also super important. Most people follow the rule of just have your shutter speed double the number of your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 FPS, the ideal shutter speed would be 1/48, or as close as you can get to with that. Sometimes it's 1/50, sometimes it's 1/60. Just depends on the camera. Just get as close to it as you can. But this rule can easily be broken if you know how it works. So with shutter speed, once again, the higher the number, the less light is going to come in, because it's affecting how much light it's letting in per second, or how fast the shutter is opening and closing to let light in. So the slower or the lower you have that number, the longer it's open, because it's per second. So like 1/48 is 1/48 of a second that it opens and closes. That's how fast it is. So the smaller the number that is, the slower it is, and the more light it lets in, but also the more motion blur it lets in. So if you're looking for a really, really dreamy type feel with just like super blur everywhere, or like a really dizzying feeling, something like that, making your shutter speed smaller would actually really help sell that effect, I think. And then if you're looking to do like a super action scene, or just like a super crisp and tight, like Sherlock Holmes style scene, you're going to want to turn up your shutter speed, because it takes out a lot of that motion blur. It does cut down on more of the light, so you'll have to compensate otherwise. But then it makes that motion so much smoother. Like right now, I've just got my normal 24 FPS at 1/48 shutter speed. You can see there's a decent amount of motion blur. If I were to turn this up to even just 1/60th, you would notice there's a lot less blur. So the further and further you go up with that, the less and less blur there is. Next up is shooting format. Shooting format is also a huge part before recording video, making sure that you have the right frames per second, you have the right format, or the right resolution. All of that is super important. Depending on what your camera capabilities are, I recommend trying to shoot at the highest resolution possible. Say, for example, you have a camera that can shoot 4K, and you only need 24 FPS, and it can do that at 4K. Do it. If you can't shoot at 4K, say you need a scene that needs to shoot at 60 FPS and your camera does not do 4K at 60 FPS, then go ahead and downres to 1080, because that is kind of the standard right now, still is 1080p format. We're slightly shifting into the 4K realm, but there's still so much yet that needs to be done for it to become like the standard, because editing softwares and computers and everything has to be able to upgrade to that resolution, because it is a huge jump in quality, that the amount of rendering it takes and just the amount of processing and all that, everything needs to be able to keep up with it, and it's just that much harder for it to do. So I recommend sticking to the 1080p format for right now. If that's all your camera can handle, that is perfectly fine. I wouldn't recommend going any lower than that though, because then it'll start to seem like you're back in 2008. So just keep that in mind. And also know how frame rates work. 24 FPS is your standard cinematic frame rates or frames per second, because that's what the old film reels actually used to run at. Roughly, it's like a 23.895 or something like that. I can't remember the exact number, but it's roughly around 24 FPS, and that's roughly about what the human brain registers as well. 30 FPS is your typical like YouTube video, like sitting down like this. I technically should be recording at 30 FPS right now, but I just prefer the 24 FPS for some reason. I don't know why. To me, it's just more comfortable, and it's just what I stick with. And then in 60 FPS, that's going to be your 50% speed slow motion, and then 120, even slower motion, and it goes up and up from there. So if you're looking to do slow motion, adjust your frame rate to like a 60 or a 120, higher and higher up. Just make sure that you're also adjusting your shutter speed with it, because if you're shooting at 60 FPS and you have your shutter speed set to 1/48, boy, that is going to be blurry. Just a heads up to all of you guys. And also note what type of file format you're shooting in, whether it be like MP4 or AVCHD. I personally shoot in AVCHD because it just has the best overall quality and the least compression. Granted, that takes up more space on my cards than MP4, but I'd rather have the higher quality and use up that little bit of extra storage because I'm always cleaning off my cards anyways. I put all the files on my computer, make backups immediately on my external hard drive, and then I wipe my cards after I double check to make sure that all the files made it okay. And so then I'm just good to go again. I've got two 64 gigabyte SD cards in this thing, so I've got 128 gigabytes that last me several hours, roughly 6 hours, I think, or no, more like 12 hours of recording. So I'm really not too worried about space on my camera. If you are and you're getting low on space, think about switching some format like MP4 or something like that. You'll lose a little bit of quality, but you will be able to get more. If you're really like in a time crunch and you're running out of space, you don't have time to go put files on a computer, clean off the card, and put it back, I'd recommend just switching shooting formats or just knowing ahead of time what you need if you're going to have enough recording space on the card. You know, change settings accordingly to your needs. And also, don't forget to set your color profile. A lot of people tend to use the pre-made color profiles within cameras. I myself, since I have the Canon C100, I like to use the Canon log profile because it gives me a nice flat image to work with so that when I'm in post, I can color grade. This is actually the neutral image right now. This is what I start with when I'm recording. This is the bare raw footage, and here's the color grade. You can tell there's a huge difference. But the nice thing is that while I'm editing, I can choose what looks I want. So say I can also do this look I can go with. This one's pretty cool. And I'll just go back to the original. I can swap through as many different styles as I want because I've got basically a plain palette to work from. And I can do whatever I want with it. So really, I like having the log profile because it gives me a nice flat image. There's nothing too contrasty anywhere. I can build the contrast however I like and build my image from there. So the next step is audio. Trust me guys, this is so important. There are so many independent starting filmmakers that forget about audio. I actually just did an entire video on recording sound, so if you guys want to, be sure to go check that out in the info card up here. It was another budget tips and techniques video like this. It'll run you through just basic audio recording operations, basic knowledge on microphones, stuff like that to get you started. But this is such a huge neglected step in most filmmakers' processes that it sometimes hurts because it's such an important, it is half of the video experience. Like right now, if you were to watch this video without audio, back with the sound on again, this video would just be really boring without any audio. You wouldn't know what's going on. So to not focus on the audio is losing half the battle. To me, I don't see it. I don't see why we neglect audio sometimes. So definitely think about that. Make sure that you've got the right microphone. You know what microphone you need for the situation. Make sure you have it set up accordingly as close as you can to your subject so you can capture the best sound possible. And just make sure you know in general what you're doing. Like right now, I've got my Rode NTG4 microphone just out of frame right here, hooked up to my Zoom H4n Pro audio recorder right here just out of frame. And honestly, I've never been happier with the audio quality that I've made. But that's been a huge focus for me this entire channel. The first product review I did was on the Zoom H1 audio recorder. Go check that out too. And I also, check it out up here. And I also did a Zoom H4n audio product review. And so check that out as well. There's so many different things to worry about with audio. But at the same time, it's something that we really need to look into and pay attention to. Make sure that you're actually listening to your audio before it too, testing everything, listening for echo, seeing if there's ways you can deaden the sound. I mentioned that in my video on recording sound as well, on ways to take care of extraneous sounds, echoes, stuff like that. Just make sure that in general you're testing your audio before you actually do the recording so that you don't get into post and you're like, why does this sound so bad, when in reality, you could have just tested it out on set, realized what the problem was, and had it fixed and ready to go. And my last tip for today is know what you're shooting. This is, I know all of these tips so far have been important, but this, to me, is probably the most important because it's the easiest to let slip. Some people don't like to plan before a shoot. They like to just get on set and kind of roll with the punches. Not me. I really think that's a horrible idea. Because having things planned out and ready, even just a generic idea, just knowing in general what your plans are for the day, what scenes you plan to get shot, what general ideas you have for shots that need to get done, general setups you need to have ready. There's still room and time to play if you give yourself that time to plan. If you have everything planned ahead of time, you can give yourself time to experiment when you get there. Trust me, just setting up gear takes forever. So if you have to take that extra time to figure out where things go instead of already knowing where they go, it's going to make your life so much worse because it's going to take that much more time and you're going to have a lot less time to actually shoot and get down what you need. So just plan out the little technical things and worry about the creative stuff when you get there. Like, really, as long as you have the technical stuff down, you can save the creative stuff for set, no problem. And even just like if you're just doing content like I am right now, just knowing what you're gonna say right now, I've got an outline. Like, I've got a notebook here with the outline for everything in this video. Having something to reference or knowing it, or at least just knowing what you're gonna be covering is huge. There are countless times where I've hit the record button and I've just frozen because I didn't know what I was gonna talk about. I knew the subject, I knew every key points, I didn't know where to start. So, you know, knowing what you're going to be talking about and how you're going to be going about it and just all of that is super, super helpful. And the same thing goes for being on set for a short film. Knowing what the scene is going to be, making sure your actors know what they're doing, all of that is super important. And just to have everyone on the same page, make sure that everyone knows what's going on. We know where the camera's going to be. We know where all the equipment's going to be. We know where the actors are going to be. We know what the actors are going to do and say. Having all of that knowledge so that you don't have to stop mid-take, call cut, and then have the actor try to find out what's going on or have the DP try to figure out what's going on. You need to have everyone on the same page. It's all a communications thing. That is like the biggest thing in film is communication. If nobody knows what's going on because nobody's talking to each other, nothing will get done. And also just in general, know where you've left your spare gear. Like when I'm on set, I make sure that all of my gear that I'm not using is in my case, all the way on the opposite side of the area that I'm in with all the stuff in it. I know exactly where the case is. I leave it open so it's easy access. Anyone can just go to it at any time, grab what's needed, come back, set it up, we're good to go, or put away something, whatever happens. Just make sure that it's away from the rest of the set so that no one trips over it, doesn't get in the way, doesn't get in the shot. And also check for safety issues. Make sure there's no loose cables. Tape things down that you might need to tape down. And just make sure that everything in general is safe for the entire crew. If it's a big enough budget, you know, worry about insurance, stuff like that. Make sure everything's covered. You don't have to worry about anyone getting hurt. And also make sure in terms of knowing what you're shooting, make sure you know what's in the frame. Don't just mindlessly kind of pick a spot and shoot for it just because the angle on the person looks good. Make sure that the angle on everything looks good. Worry about the background, worry about the set dressing, the color palette, you know, any logos that might be in the background. I had this problem with Spent. It's the reason I can't send it to any festival circuits because there are so many logos that I didn't account for because I didn't know what was in my frame. So please, guys, just be mindful of that. Know what you're shooting, both in the camera and around the camera. Just know everything. And just in general, guys, make sure you know what you're doing. Don't go into a shoot clueless, not knowing at all what's going on. Don't half-ass it. Put your effort into it. Make sure you know what's happening. But anyways, guys, thank you so much. I believe that's all I got for you today. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in. I will see you guys all next week with the next video. Peace out.
Okay, I've been working like 3 jobs. Probably why I never see ya. Probably why I never have time for the fake friends that won't be ya. Oh God, I've been running now. Up early when the sun is out. Not setting out my own soul, but those real ones, they coming out. Oh, look who's reaching out. Old friends wanna feature now. They don't work, so they need it free. Ooh.